we're going to talk about, as I said, is regenerative agriculture. It's kind of become a bit of a buzzword. If you're following things in agriculture, sustainability, environment, you will see a lot of talk about regenerative agriculture being good for climate change and good for biodiversity loss and a more sustainable way of producing our food. And I've got two people with us tonight who are massively involved in these things and will be able to tell us all about it. So first guest is Jeff Korsmit, a friend of mine who I met on Instagram many years ago and have been following for quite a while. And Jeff is in the Netherlands and he will tell you all about what he does in a second. So Jeff, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. And secondly, we've got Lynn Castles from Lynbreck Croft. We were going to have Sandra, her partner, as well, but Sandra is busy on the farm. It's run late. Lynn, has it, the farming work today?
Yeah, that's the first rule of farming is things never go to plan. So yeah, it's just me tonight, but thank you very much for having me along, Sean.
No worries. Well, that means that you're going to have to talk double the amount now, Lynn, but I believe that's not a problem for an Irish person like you, is it?
Not a problem, no. As long as I've got tea, then that's fine.
Good. We've got the gift of the gab, so that makes for a good webinar, right?
Absolutely.
Cool. So we'll jump right in, I guess, just with a brief introduction to kind of who you are, what you do, what's your background. So we'll start with Lynn, I guess.
Yeah, so background is not in farming. So grew up in Northern Ireland, went to train as an archaeologist, believe it or not, in university. Worked a little bit as an archaeologist for a while, did lots of traveling and ended up having a bit of a kind of a career change. In my late 20s, I went to work for the National Trust as an apprentice ranger. And that, I guess, really got me into conservation and ecology and outdoor practical work. That's where Sandra and I met, and we really kind of, I guess, shared this sort of love of nature, love of being on the land, and at that kind of time crafted this dream that we wanted to sort of buy a little plot ourselves and, you know, become self-sufficient and all that sort of thing. Fast forward a few years, we ended up leaving the National Trust and spent 2 years working as tree planters, and that really got us involved in the rewilding movement because we were working for a rewilding charity at the time, looking for a little bit of land, looking for about 5 acres. Long story short is that we ended up at Lynbreck, which is 150 acres, so it was 15 times bigger than we meant. And that's why I call us accidental farmers, because we never meant to kind of find ourselves in the position that we're in. So we used our basic introduction and practical skills in ecology to then kind of design what we wanted to be a farm business, so how to produce food in harmony with nature, and that's led us to where we are today.
Great stuff. That's a pretty big accident to find yourself doing.
These things happen.
Yeah, that's it. Happy accident.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And what about yourself, Jeff? What's your background?
Hi. yeah. So I'm Jeff. I'm a small-scale organic regenerative farmer from the Netherlands. I live in the south of the Netherlands. I raise Mangalitsa pigs, sheep, laying hens, and I also have a small orchard and I grow some vegetables. My background is I worked as a forester for the Dutch State Forestry Department for a number of years. I studied forest and nature management, and yeah, I've always been interested in working with plants and animals, and I get very enthusiastic when I walk out in nature and see all the biodiversity, and especially seeing it increase by the things that we do to the land with regenerative agriculture, and seeing these changes makes me really excited.
Yeah, good stuff. So I guess the next question to tackle for people who aren't familiar with it is, what is regenerative agriculture? Does it have a definition even now? Is it well defined? Is there a kind of arguments around what it means, like there is in rewilding?
I think it's like a collection of a lot of things. It's like an umbrella term for many different styles of farming, but I think one big thing that has in common is that it tries to mimic nature in many ways, as much as possible. I think that's what regenerative agriculture means for me, at least.
Yeah. And what about yourself, Lynn?
Yeah, I would definitely agree with what Jeff says. You know, it's really about kind of working with nature. And I think for me, regenerative agriculture is all about kind of upping our game a little bit from the other term that we like to talk about, which is sustainable agriculture. And it's about kind of saying, well, hold on a minute, you know, if we were to sustain what we currently have, is actually that good enough, or can we step it up a little bit and make everything that we do regenerative? And I think one really nice thing about the regenerative agriculture movement as well is that, you know, it's all about nature. It's all about, you know, things like the fundamentals of soil health. You know, you're always regenerating your soils all the time. But I think what people are more and more talking about as well is the regenerative effect on, you know, social elements. So reconnecting people with where their food comes from, trying to empower people to make really positive food choices based on really, you know, kind of sound, you know, information and education. And so I think regenerative agriculture, yeah, it kind of takes it from kind of the mainstream and kind of really makes it a lot more kind of personal and regenerative.
Yeah, great. And I think that's a really important point for the kind of rewilding space as well, is that there can be kind of conflict or tension amongst traditional farmers and then, you know, people taking on farmland and turning it over to rewilding. It can create a bit of headbutting, I suppose, but it should be about bringing people in on that journey as well, shouldn't it? And providing the kind of social access to what you're doing. It shouldn't be just the preserve of privileged landowners and things like it has been for quite a while, you know.
No, I would absolutely agree with that, and I would think that there's so much that there is in common with the regenerative agriculture movement and the rewilding movement. You know, I think rewilding is fundamentally about our relationship with nature. You know, nature as a system is very efficient, it works very well, but we like to poke it a lot. And I think that what is really great about the rewilding, you know, principles is it's about reconnecting people with nature. And that's what I think is the fundamentals of regenerative agriculture, is reconnecting people with nature and their food.
Yeah. And I think also that there is still, for a big part of the population, there is still this idea in their minds that it's either farmland or it's nature. And I think you guys as well, believe that it could really also be both. We can have nature and produce food as well, and actually, you know, enrich have it enrich each other. So
yeah, totally agree. So I was going to ask, like, can you give some kind of practical examples then as to how regenerative differs from traditional or conventional or even sustainable agriculture? What are the kind of broad practical principles of how you might call yourself, we're a regenerative farm rather than a sustainable farm? Lynn, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, thanks for that.
They're always tricky questions to come in.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's sort of lots of ways in which you can measure how regenerative you are. I think you know, there's I guess there's the soil element. You know, you can look at your soils and see, you know, are you building organic matter? You know, what are your soils looking like every year? When you dig a soil pit, are you counting more worms year on year? You know, that's a really good way of monitoring your soil health. But then there's the biodiversity element. So what's happening above ground? You know, are you being regenerative in that you're continually adding to the biodiversity within your land holding? You know, are you seeing more variety of plants and species coming up, or you know, are you seeing more insects and vertebrates and, you know, birds coming in? You know, that's kind of regenerative in that you're kind of working with the land as well. But what I also think is a measure of regenerative agriculture is seeing how many people are interested in what you're doing and how many people want to kind of invest in your produce, and how much the demand is growing from that market. So those are kind of, I guess, a few things that I would say are kind of measurements of regenerative.
Yeah, and Lynn, you've made part of your business model bringing people in and teaching them how to do things. So you really are kind of putting your money where your mouth is there on saying, you know, this is part of being regenerative too.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things maybe why we've kind of got this, I guess, disconnect between a lot of, you know, people and where their food comes from is that most people don't actually visit farms. They don't really know any farmers. They don't know who grows their food. And I think one of the things that we try to do is really kind of fix that, and so say to people, you know, come and speak to us, come and ask what it is that we do, learn from us, challenge us, and let's have a dialogue. And I think that's really, really important, because we always say, you know, we've nothing to hide here. We share quite a lot, and we share quite a lot because we want open and honest dialogue, and we want people to understand what it is that we do, and we want to be able to help others to learn so that they can make the step into regenerative agriculture too. And we really enjoy that element of it.
Yeah, because I know, Jeff, from your social media, that's a big part of why you run your Instagram account the way you do. You share what you're doing on social media, but also invite people in, don't you?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think creating community around food is really important, and I enjoy that part a lot. And I think that's where the part of the distrust of people with the food industry comes from, is that in mainstream agriculture, nothing's transparent. You can't, you can't visit a farm or a slaughterhouse or any of those, or you have to wear a white suit and step through a chlorine baths or of those kinds of things. And I always say, it's not an official label, but I always say I'm certified transparent, meaning that everybody's always welcome to come and visit the farm. And I mean, how great is it that I can show you a pig, like literally say, look, that's one of my pigs is called Moxie, like that's Moxie. She's going to be butchered in a week, and we'll make these kinds of products out of her, and that's the actual pig that you're going to eat. And I mean, that's not an experience that many people get these days anymore. And promoting that, and indeed making that, reconnecting with people with their food, is something that I find really important. I try to do a lot of as well. Yeah, and also on my social media, because I think a photo, what's the saying, speaks or it says more than 1,000 words or something like that. Yeah. So
yeah, I'm a big believer in that as well. I cooked, I was telling Lynn just before we came on, I cooked some pork from, a mile up the road, from a pig that I gave a little scratch to, a few months ago. But it's like, I'd much prefer to buy that kind of meat than to buy, plastic packaged meat from a factory farm, and I have no idea where it came from or what kind of life that animal had. But you can we'll get to it in a bit, but you can rile people up sometimes with that kind of content on social media, because all they see is death, and it's there in front of their face, isn't it?
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, well, I can tell many stories.
Well, we'll get to that bit in a minute, in a few minutes. But one thing I was going to ask you, Jeff, because you talk about it a lot as well, is permaculture. So I guess there's lots of elements of permaculture that are woven into the kind of regenerative umbrella. But can you just tell us quite briefly, what is permaculture? How does that work, and how it relates to being regenerative?
So I think permaculture is well, it's part of it in the name. It's more permanent. So you get continuous harvests from a system that keeps on producing food throughout the year, as opposed to, let's say, a crop of corn that you plant in, monoculture. You plant it in the beginning of the year, it grows, you harvest it at the end of the year, and that's it. But with permaculture, you try to grow many species together, and you also incorporate animals into that system where you can, because in nature, plants and animals also work together. You get continuous harvest. For example, what I do is I plant horseradish, and I forgot the name of the other plant, but it's a plant that gets very deep roots next to my fruit trees. And the fruit trees don't get root very deep, but that herb does. And it brings up nutrients from way deeper into the soil that it brings up. And when you cut the leaves off and it mulches, the fruit tree gets those minerals that are in the leaves that came from way deep that it normally wouldn't be able to access. And that symbiosis is that's an example of permaculture. What I also do, for instance, is I use my pigs in helping me plow my vegetable garden. So every year I let them do what pigs are made to do, is to root and clear the vegetable garden of weeds. and all I have to do is level it a little bit after the pigs have moved on to the next paddock, and there's my vegetable plot.
Yeah, and they fertilized it for you too,
yeah,
right?
Yeah, exactly. Yes. Yeah. So yeah.
So this is where animals come in. It's like it is again like simulating a food chain, a natural food system, a natural food web on farm to produce your own food.
Yes.
Yeah, good stuff. And Lynn, I guess you had a good bit of coverage recently. You had a great article in The Guardian we saw. One of the focuses there, I suppose, and why regenerative agriculture, or RegenAg, as a lot of people are shortening it to, one of the reasons, I guess, that it's getting a lot of media attention is around the climate change conversation. So how does regenerative agriculture kind of tie in with climate change and mitigating for that?
I think it's probably in a number of ways. I mean, I think that we all know that the science is saying that anytime you expose soil, anytime you turn over the soil, that's really not a good situation. It's something that we've now learned is one of the best ways to release carbon back into the atmosphere. And RegenAg is generally a lot of practices, sort of livestock or arable related ones are all about keeping the soil covered nowadays, keeping it keeping that kind of layer of armor on top, so that we're effectively locking in carbon rather than releasing it through our farming practices.
And by that you mean vegetation, yeah?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. I think as well, another thing that's really popular or in regenerative agriculture is more incorporating trees into your farming unit. So agroforestry, as it's called. So having kind of like tree crops, or woodlands, or shelter belts, or hedgerows, all interconnected within your farming unit. And obviously, we all know that trees are really effective as well as kind of really healthy pasture and grassland at drawing in carbon and sequestering carbon. And I think as well, one thing that I quite like about regenerative agriculture is that it talks a lot about carbon in a really positive way. Every time we talk about climate change, where there's kind of like slogans like, up here in Scotland, we have Brewdog, they're the big kind of beer company, and they talk about killing carbon, how they're going to become carbon neutral by planting all these trees, and we should kill carbon. And we forget that carbon is the building blocks of all of life. It is fundamental to everything. Carbon is good. Carbon is the good guy. What we want to do is keep it locked in the earth. And I think everything that regenerative agriculture is about is keeping carbon, locked into the earth and celebrating it for what it is, rather than demonizing it. So yeah, that's a few of my thoughts on it.
Yeah. Anything to add there, Jeff?
Yeah, no, I fully agree. It's just the idea that we can use animals and with holistic plant grazing to lock carbon in the soil and build soil from the bottom up and produce food. So we make good food and we fight climate change. How awesome is that? I mean, that's just, I get really excited, that's possible. And
yeah, me too.
Want to see as much as possible.
Yeah. I guess a little bit of soil science. One of the most visual things that I've seen talking about soil health and building healthy soils and things was looking at permanent pasture versus kind of annually cropped fields and things, and doing, I don't know if you've seen, you probably have the kind of cutaways or kind of sections of soil where they've like literally taken out one side of a field, and you can see the root depth of all these grasses and things that have been there for years and years going right down into the soil and literally pulling carbon out of the atmosphere into the soil and building kind of a proper healthy mix of fungi and bacteria and protozoa and all the tiny microscopic elements of soil that are a whole ecosystem under our feet in themselves, aren't they?
Yeah. I mean, everything comes back to the soil. Absolutely everything that we do, and that's as a farmer, when you look at it as a farmer, and if you kind of to talk about it in a business sense, your bank account is your soil, and so therefore you want as much healthy stuff you want that kind of financial value of your soil increasing year on year. Otherwise, it's depreciating in a way that's not regenerative. So when you look at it, compared to a bank account, you're always looking to reinvest, build your capital, increase all the time. And that's just, as a business owner now, that to me makes a hell of a lot of sense. So there's no way that I would ever do anything intentionally to damage what it is that my whole business is built on.
Yeah. I've heard the stat, you've probably heard it too, where people say, there's only 20 or only 100 harvests left in the UK because we're diminishing our topsoil at such a rate due to how we farm it, but also due to flooding and, massive monoculture crops and things like that, climate change as well, washing it away. I've heard most recently 60 harvests left in the UK. So it is a real problem, isn't it? But we're starting to see, I guess, more regenerative principles even crossing over into what we would consider conventional agriculture. So things like cover crops or kind of over sowing and not quite doing the whole plow and till kind of cycle. So it is promising, I think, what's happening, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so for sure. And I think also we have a lot of work to do with education towards the public, because we were just talking about grass. I think when an average person thinks about grass, they think of a lawn, and they don't realize what the potential of grass or grasslands mixed with herbs is, and how we can utilize that, and also with grazing animals and producing food. I think there's a lot of education that we need to do, because many people don't realize what they're looking at. Like, you can see a cow grazing in a field, but it can be a field with 3 species of grass, and the cow it's continually grazed by a cow, or you can have it holistically managed, and there's rotational grazing where you build up soil, and many people are unaware of the differences, and there's I think still a lot of education to do. But also I agree with what you just said, is that we're starting to see more and more, and even farmers that aren't necessarily fully regenerative starting to rotate the animals, because they've seen it with other people and they've seen the improvements in their pastures, and so they're making small changes, but I think they're heading in the right way.
Yeah, I mean, we called this webinar, is it the future or is it a fad? RegenAg.
Totally the future.
Yeah. But I think like some of the criticism of it from within various sections of the farming community are that, it is a fad and everyone's RegenAg now, #RegenAg and things. Do you think that's a good thing or a bad thing? Lynn, are you like territorial over, they're not real regenerative?
I find it, I find it also interesting, and I find it interesting for a number of reasons. I mean, one, because I'm not from a farming background, so I Sean, if you'd have said to me 5 years ago, oh, you're doing RegenAg or you're doing regenerative agriculture, I would have literally had no idea what you were talking about. We would have said, no, all we're doing, well, at that point we were setting up the sort of the business, but it was like, no, we're just, working with what we've got. That's what I would that's what we would always say. And I think it's interesting as well to talk about it as a fad, in that, they say that, any publicity is good publicity. So if you're talking about it, then it's good. You're talking about it, you're raising the profile, and you're challenging quite a big industry with regenerative agriculture principles. The industry that is farming is a very, very big industry, which is reliant on, a lot of input from a lot of big companies, and a lot of the principles of regenerative agriculture, which are, which say, for example, that Jeff's been talking about, is using animals, moving them around to build soil health. Well, you can do that with relatively inexpensive kit. And actually that can kind of deliver a lot of really impressive outcomes, such as, increasing the carrying capacity, the actual productivity of your land by simply moving these animals, mimicking, natural herd movements, for example, and then allowing your ground to rest. Very, very, very simple basic principles that are based on nature. And, if we look at the future in that sense and think, is regenerative agriculture a fad? is there actually an alternative? Is there, is it, the thing is that, do we have a choice? Because
or
I
time.
think, or time, you know, I'm not a climate scientist. I just see the headlines everybody else sees, but you look at that IPCC report that came out a week or two ago, and if they're actually, you know, if that's actually, you know, if they're actually talking about the timescales that are correct, then do we have an alternative and do we have an option? I know, Jeff, do you want to jump in there?
Yeah, no, I really agree. I recently made a trip to Transylvania, which by the way I really recommend, because if you're into permaculture, regenerative agriculture, that is the Valhalla of all of that, because their biodiversity is still truly amazing. But as soon as I left Romania and drove back into Hungary and then into Austria and Germany, I don't think I saw a single cow on the land all the way from Eastern Hungary to like Western Germany. And just that idea alone, I found so alarming, that where are all these animals that are supposed to be grazing outside on the land, creating soil? They've all been stuck in big barns, and you know, we have to, or they're mostly fed with corn, which takes a lot of fossil fuels to be harvested and everything. I'm like, we really need to put these animals back in back on the land and in these type of systems that we just have been talking about. And that just that realization, like, where are the animals? What have we done? Like, we really, I think, yeah, I think their time is running out. So I'm very happy with every little change that we see towards regenerative agriculture. So yeah,
great. Well, two important points have come up there. First is biodiversity, and you know how this impacts that, and then let's move on and talk about actual, you know, domestic farm food animals. Biodiversity loss, first of all, I think biodiversity loss is sort of like the poorer known cousin of climate change, but just as important for, you know, ecosystem health and environment health. Anything we take out of those systems, you know, has an impact, whether we see it or know it or measure it. So talk to me about kind of biodiversity loss and how regenerative agriculture supports kind of wildlife and ecosystem recovery. Lynn, you've seen it firsthand since you've been doing it on your place, right?
Yeah, I think so, definitely. I mean, you know, biodiversity loss is the canary in the coal mine, isn't it? You know, I think it was it David Attenborough that said, you know, in relation to butterflies, you know, counting butterflies is like taking the pulse of Mother Nature. And every year we're counting butterflies, you know, like in the UK, the big butterfly count. And every year it seems to be like butterflies are declining, butterflies are declining. And so, like, something's screaming at us and we're all just going, no, you know, fingers in ears. I can't, you know, listen to this. I can't deal with this. We can't change. It's too big and it's too scary to change. But, you know, I think the principles about regenerative agriculture are kind of moving away from seeing elements of nature as something that you have to fight versus something that you have to embrace and work with. So, you know, things like, you know, dockins, you know, people, oh, dockins, you know, they're docks, they're such weeds. Well, actually, they're incredible plants because they've got really deep roots. They pull up all sorts of minerals and nutrients that other plants can't. So actually, that's really good for potentially other plants, or it's really good for your soil health. So it's starting to kind of reevaluate and recalibrate these plants in our minds that we see as being something that we have to fight against, when actually they're, you know, really they're all nature speaking to us, and it's a language that we're having to relearn. So I think those are all kind of fundamentals that are interwoven within regenerative agriculture. And it's something where, I think it was a point that Jeff made earlier on, it's something where you're not seeing nature as something that you're kind of separate. It's something that you're always in harmony with. You're always in harmony with it. And that's a big mind shift from where mainstream agriculture, I would say, is today in the main, which is change the land, kind of control the crops, monoculture everything, and then just keep repeating that.
And it's a vicious cycle as well, isn't it? And I see this in micro scale on my allotment, where, you know, my neighbors are two old boys, brothers in their late 70s, 80s. And, you know, it's like bare earth everywhere and rows of broad beans and spraying them for black fly every spring and asking me, what should I do? How should I spray them? I'm like, maybe, you know, be a little less severe about your weeds, which will attract in all your beneficial insects, and the ladybirds will sort out the black fly. But you know, conventional agriculture or mass scale agriculture has done that, where it's basically tidied up the edges and made these very sterile landscapes where crops can't resist pest and disease, and then it becomes this vicious cycle of wiping out everything and nature becoming the enemy, doesn't it? Yeah.
I think talking about biodiversity, well, I live in the Netherlands, and I don't think many people realize that the Netherlands is, after the United States, we are the second biggest agricultural exporter in the world. So teeny tiny country, 17 million people, and we're the second biggest agricultural exporter in the world. So imagine how intensified our agriculture system is. And just as an example of biodiversity loss, I remember when I was a little boy, I would always used to look at the squashed insects on the front of my parents' car, and the car was covered with them. And at a certain point, like throughout the years, I guess, the insects just got less and less and less, and now you don't hardly kill any insects with your car. Because they're just gone. It's like a wall, and we're taking out bricks by bricks until at some point, you know, the wall's going to collapse. And when I went to, for instance, to Transylvania in Romania, where the biodiversity still is intact, my car was covered with bugs again. I mean, it's really striking to see the difference. And we are raised with, you know, from as a child with people saying that our biodiversity has gone down and everything, and you take that for granted, but you don't know how bad it is until you've seen what it should be. And that's what I saw in Romania, what it should be, and only then it really clicked with me how bad it is here, because I saw what it could have been. And and when I then look at my farm, where I have my laying hens that I rotate on pasture in a mobile chicken tractor. When we started, there were 3 species of grass in that field. Now there's 50 types of wildflowers and grasses, and all the wildlife is in our farm, because all the farmers around us are regular intensified farmers, and all the wildlife is on our farm, and that, just seeing that proves that this is the right way. This is the way to go.
Yeah. No, I remember that as well. Going down on family trips or whatever in the car, and you'd get like blip, 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 insects bursting on the windscreen and covering the license plate at the end of the thing, but you don't see it anymore. And then, of course, that's food for everything else, for bats and birds
and the small people don't. You don't miss a little fly, but so people don't think about it, but. When you do think about it, you know, that's where it starts. It starts with the small, you know, creatures, and it goes up. And if we start losing the little ones, you know, it has an effect on everything. Yes, yeah.
It's a shifting baseline syndrome as well, isn't it? It's that, you know, I remember when this was like this, and our grandparents remember when it was far richer than what we remember. So you were seeing that slide, unfortunately. Let's move on then from wild animals and creatures and plants to our domesticated ones. So both of you, inherently, what you do at the heart of your businesses is produce meat. So tell us about kind of why a regenerative approach to producing meat is maybe better or more responsible for the environment than intensive agricultural systems. Lynn, we'll start with you maybe.
Well, we you know, sort of fairly early on, completely embraced the really great phrase that came from Joel Salatin, which is working with the animalness of the animal. So kind of looking at the animals that you have and really utilizing their natural instincts to work with you. So we always talk about our animals as part of a team, so work with you to regenerate the land, and then at the end of that they provide this incredible produce that we then offer for sale to local markets. So we have pigs that we work either in our woodlands or in our grasslands, and their job is to break up the kind of dense mats of vegetation, to open up little pockets of soil where new seedlings can sort of grow, drop and set seed, and then hopefully increase the biodiversity above ground. We use our cattle as part of our kind of field and woodland regenerators. So we have a small fold of Highland cattle who we work on a sort of a broadly kind of holistic planned grazing, mob grazing / Lynbreck style, moving around in the summertime daily, and then kind of less so in the winter time. But the idea is that they're kind of mimicking natural herd movements. It's a mixed age, mixed sex fold of Highland cattle, and you're kind of moving them all the time. We then have pasture hens, so we have hens in a mobile hen house that we keep out in the field. Again, it's utilizing, you know, the superpower of a hen, which is scratching and then fertilizing. So we're able to use them to target areas where we've got, you know, say, for example, very low diversity, a lot of moss in the grass. We put the hens through there, then we take them out, we allow it to rest, and then year on year, we're seeing more and more plants coming back. And then we have bees as well, so we keep a number of hives, and the work for the bees is pollinators. So we're obviously trying to increase diversity in the grasslands and the woodlands, and so we need the bees as part of that. So that's really how we kind of work with the team. But all of that is something that we try and tell the story of to people locally and then wider afield. So, you know, for us, it's really important to share all of that. You know, some people like it as the story element, you know, they like to feel more connected with understanding about the animals that way. But equally, we always have very kind of, I would say, upfront conversations about how, you know, the cows, you know, those two this year, they're going for meat. You know, these pigs that we're standing and talking about here, you know, they're going to be going for meat. But it's not about making it morbid or morose. It's celebrating life. It's celebrating the circle of life, and it's respecting the life that they're giving us and the legacy of the work that they do. So it's kind of it's the same thing. It's going the same way, but it's just bringing that conversation into it.
Yeah. And what about you, Jeff?
Well, I like I said, I have Mangalitsa pigs, a rare breed of lard pig from Hungary. I rotate them through our hedgerows. They're fairly well. They're not really hedges, but what do you call it? It's like a little bit wider with trees in there as well. And they have their own paddocks that they move around in. Then I do sheep, rotationally grazed sheep. For meat, 100% grass-fed, and I have my laying hens that I rotate on pasture as well. There's also a beehive. I don't. There's a beekeeper who looks after that for me, but they pollinate my fruit trees. So, yeah.
Great. And I guess the fundamental difference here is that you are trying to mimic or give your animals that are destined to be meat as natural a life as possible. It's the complete antithesis to industrial agriculture that gets criticized so much, especially when we're talking about climate change and greenhouse gas emissions and things. Yeah. I think you'd both agree, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you'd both agree that massive scale industrial agriculture, the likes of which we're seeing in the United States with feedlot cattle and things like that, being fed soya from South America, that is ultimately destructive to the climate and the environment, isn't it?
Yes, for sure. I think what many people are now, many people are now think that, meat is bad. Meat, eat less meat, meat is bad. But they usually, when they think of meat, they think of meat produced from an industrial farm. And of course, nothing good comes from a big industrial farm, but that is one production model of meat. But industrial farming doesn't define meat. There are many different ways of producing meat, and some are even like what we're talking about, are beneficial to the environment. So meat in itself is not a bad thing. I recently heard a comparison that you could compare meat to a hammer. A hammer is not inherently good or bad; it's just an object. But you can use a hammer to build a house, but you can also use a hammer to bash someone's head in, so it's and the same is with meat. You can produce meat in a very bad way that's damaging to the environment, but you can also do it in a good, sustainable, regenerative way even, and that's what I try to promote, that it's that it can also be done well. I actually was a vegetarian because I became so disillusioned with how meat was produced that I just thought to myself, I'm just going to stop eating meat because I don't want to have anything to do with this. Which I think is the first reaction of a lot of people. Like they take a step back, like, no, I don't want, I see all this slaughterhouse abuse and all these animals in crowded barns. I don't want anything to do with that. So they stop eating meat. So which I did as well for a while. But then I thought to myself, what am I now really changing by not eating meat? Everything's still going on. The things that I don't like are still going on. Yes, you know that, like that saying that people keep repeating over and over, be the change you wish to see. The change that I wish to see was that meat or animals that were raised for meat would also be able to have a decent life, and also, if possible, which is possible, in a regenerative setting. And then I just thought to myself, okay, I have the opportunity because there was land available of family members that I could start the farm on. So then I just had to start doing it myself, and I've been quite successful.
Yeah, good stuff.
Yeah.
Lynn,
Yeah.
would your journey around kind of the ethics of meat eating and meat production be kind of similar, or what was your stance on it?
Yeah, definitely. And I'm going to kind of come back to that. I just want to pick up on something else that we were just talking about there, because I think what we were sort of starting to allude to was one of the, you know, when you're talking about sort of these kind of like massive industrial processes that, you know, is mainstream ag or big ag, you know, that's the other one. It's not regen ag, it's big ag. And really all, you know, the question that will all come back to people like myself and people like Jeff, and they'll look at what we do and they think, well, you know, okay, so I don't like that big system, but, you know, look at what you're doing. You know, how's that going to feed the world? How's what you're going to do and feed the world? And there's always this, I think it's probably one of the biggest criticisms, isn't it, of regenerative agriculture, is it generally seems to be the smaller people who are talking about it. And it's seen as being less productive, which there are many people now showing that that's not the case. Just like, you know, permaculture is not an unproductive system. It's an incredibly abundant productive system. Why it's not mainstream, sorry, I should say, is probably a whole kind of topic for another sort of series.
Right, new webinar idea there.
So we talk about, well, how are we going to feed the world? And, you know, the question is, well, how much food are we wasting? So there's that element of it. And the second element as well is that, you know, when we talk about, you know, industrial processes, and, you know, we end up kind of being quite negative about farmers, don't we? Of which we are one. And, you know, we end up kind of going, well, you know, farmers have to do this and farmers have to do that. And we forget the context of what farming is as a food production industry, which involves farmers. It also involves an industry, which is feed companies, fertilizer companies, tractor companies, lots of other companies. It involves the government, who subsidize the farming, so they're paying farmers to farm in a certain way. And it also involves consumers, and they're the ones, you know, the customers, the people that put their hands in their pocket and pull it out. So whenever we talk about big ag and kind of intensive agriculture, we're all a part of it. So collectively, we're the only ones that can kind of change it. But it's not about, you know, targeting like the little people and going, well, you're not going to feed the world. It's a huge, massive kind of area of conversation to have on a much bigger scale. And when it comes down to the ethics side of it, you know, like Jeff, you know, I used to, you know, we went through a phase of, well, I went through a phase of not really caring what I ate, to be honest, because I worked really hard, and I'd get to the weekend and I'd think, yeah, I want that bacon sandwich, and I don't know where the pork's come from, but I've worked hard and I want to enjoy it. And then slowly I started to question things more and more, and now, you know, we've got to a point where I say I'm a kind of an ethical meat and dairy eating vegan. So, you know, it's all kind of that journey that we come apart on. But whenever you work closely with animals and you see the lives that and the personalities that they have, you can't help but become affected by that.
Yeah. Jeff, I've heard you say before that, you know, we all have 3 votes every day of our lives on kind of what food systems we want, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, right?
Yeah, I think that many people are under the impression that they don't have a say in the kind of food system that we have, but it's exactly the opposite. Indeed, people can vote 3 times a day. Sorry. For what kind of food system they want. They vote with their wallets, and it's up to the people to show what they want with their, you know, indeed with their wallet. And I think that many people, that idea hasn't sunken in with many people. They think, oh, we just have to make do with what's in the supermarket. But there are regenerative farmers are all around you. Drive around in around your area and look up farmers that produce locally and sustainably, and buy from them.
Yeah, well, we had a question come in from Natasha, who asked, what practical indicators can a consumer look for to assess whether meat is farmed in a regenerative way by a farmer? Grass-fed, reared outdoors, organic is not that informative as a label. So what would your advice be on finding those kind of products?
Go to the farmers, I guess. Go to the farm where you're going to buy your stuff, your products. You can see for yourself, and you can ask the farmer what kind of practices that he, how he runs his farm, and if there is something wrong with what you bought, the farmer, so you can. There's no, if you buy it in the supermarket, who are you going to talk to if there's something with your product?
It's the middleman.
And here you have a conversation with your farmer, and maybe even farmers might even welcome people helping on their. That's talk about involving people with where their food comes from. They might even welcome you to help on the farm, and indeed asking questions, having a look, because also indeed organic doesn't necessarily mean that an animal has walked outside on a pasture.
It's not welfare related, is it?
Yes. Yeah. No. So yeah.
Lynn, anything to add to that on like kind of where to source your food, or how to source your food, or make those changes?
Yeah, so again, I kind of want to be quite honest and say that actually, the sort of the diet that I would lead as a farmer who's producing, first and foremost, we produce our own food, and then everything else that we sell to the community. I do feel very privileged to eat the food that I eat. I do feel that the quality of the food that I eat is probably better than what any supermarket, most delis will ever sell. And I feel that that's a great injustice in the world, that I can eat this. And a lot of people who are on, lower incomes, who are maybe in the middle of a city somewhere, do not have access to this kind of food, and that's not right. I personally, I don't believe that's right at all. How we go about changing that is a really difficult question, and I don't honestly think I have the answer to it. I think there are, if you go into a shop and there's a label like organic, or like Pasture Fed Livestock Association, for example, which is an organization that we have in this country, those are all really good indicators. I think we're really fortunate to live in a digital world whereby a lot of people are selling online. So a lot of farmers are selling online. It started with the whole kind of Abel and Cole revolution, didn't it, with the veg boxes. Well, now you can get weekly meat boxes. You can get them all delivered to your door. You can get dairy products delivered to your door. So I think that's a kind of a more practical route for people who are kind of city-based and city-locked. But I think it is always really important to have that conversation of cost and ease and time, and the fairness of that.
Yeah. I was going to say, one of the questions that came into me, which I'd kind of prepared myself as well, but came into me on Instagram during the week, was from a more conventional farmer saying, it is a place of privilege really for food producers to be saying you should only be buying local or organic or regenerative or whatever, because in the current system, those things tend to be more expensive, and a lot of people can't afford them, right?
Yeah, and that is that we can't shy away from that. I think we have to address that head on. And I know that the produce that we sell is more expensive than the meat that you pick up in Tesco, but what the cost that we sell it at is closer to reflecting the true cost of what it was to produce it. And that's when we get into a much bigger conversation, isn't it, about food prices, and the fact that farming subsidies are not there to subsidize the farmer. They're there to subsidize the cost of food. And why, where is the finance going here? And so the conversations are much bigger than that. But to have actual food that's really good, nutritious, quality, organic food, to have that as a privilege, I think we've really lost our way there.
Yeah. I think even though for people that live in a city, they might not be able to keep a pig or chickens, but if you live on a balcony, buy a couple of tomato seeds or plant, do some vertical gardening. Many people can also get involved with, growing their own food a little bit like that, and that's also reconnecting, I think. So maybe get an allotment like you did, Sean. Those are the first steps that you can also make. Growing stuff yourself. Try growing stuff yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you think there's an education issue? Obviously, both living in different countries, but do you think there's an education issue around people just not knowing where food comes from or how it's produced anymore?
Yeah. Well, yeah, yes, I think so, and that's why I'm so active on my social media, trying to show everything. I literally go into the slaughterhouse when my pigs are butchered, because I want to show this is the actual process. Because many times what people see is only slaughterhouse abuse videos, and because nobody goes and has a look at like, oh, let's turn on the video and see how pigs are getting slaughtered. So the only reference that they have is the abuse kind.
Yeah.
But I want to show that it can also be done in a proper way, and yeah. So, like I said, transparency is very important to me.
Yeah, and that's part of what you're doing, Lynn, as well, educating people on.
Yeah, well, I think there's a lot of education needed to kind of tackle head on the miseducation that's of a lot of the information out there that's very, very confusing and is presented in a very black and white way. That's not actually factually accurate, such as all farming is bad, all meat is bad, therefore we need to be all 100% plant-based diet. And actually, that's not the case. That's factually incorrect. But if we don't, if people like us, and if people like Jeff aren't, through our Instagram and our social media aren't saying, well, hold on a minute, this is actually, what it looks like from the coalface, this is actually what it looks like on the ground, this is what we're trying to do, and this is how and why, then that's the only way that we can kind of get that information out. And we have to be the educators, I think.
Yeah. Can you just talk to me about some examples of how, and this isn't like being anti-vegan or anti-plant-based diets, but how that simplistic argument of plant-based good, meat bad, how that falls down when it comes to things like climate change and carbon and biodiversity?
Well, I think that many people are now told that as long as it's vegan, it's good for the planet. But I believe it couldn't be further from the truth, really, because many of the vegan and plant-based products that are now being made come from big monoculture systems, which don't do anything for soil health or not regenerative at all. But people have been told that because it's vegan, it's good for the, it's not killing the rainforest. And I think that's really there's a lot of misinformation there. And also people that go vegan for ethical reasons, because they think, they say, I've heard this phrase often, I don't want anything to die for my food. Well, if you're under the impression that nothing dies for a vegan diet, you're very mistaken, because if you have a good omnivore diet with meat that comes from like a regenerative system, let's take a cow that grazes on a field, that's one cow that goes to a slaughterhouse. But that field, which is a habitat for thousands of other animals and plants, stays intact. But if you want to incorporate a lot of plant-based or plants or nuts in your diet, most of what we eat comes from annuals, and annuals generally require a lot of tilling. So the tilling means you rip open the soil and you basically destroy that whole habitat for all of those animals. And yes, you might eat a plant, but all of that habitat and all of those animals were killed and destroyed for that. So if you want to eat from the principle of least harm, you might want to think about incorporating sustainably raised meat back into your diet.
Yeah, people don't think industrial plant-based agriculture is harmful, but it can be just
Yeah.
as, if not worse,
Yes.
right?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you favor the domestic farm animal, or do you favor biodiversity and ecological integrity? It's a tricky one.
Yeah. Is an earthworm less important than a cow? Both are, living creatures.
Yeah. Yeah. We'll have to have a whole other ethics debate, I think, on another webinar. We're getting carried away. What about, just to finish on kind of like veganism or plant-based diets, because especially on social media, there's a lot of people, like small minority, but shouting loudest about certain things. And Lynn, as you said, like it's black or white, there's no gray areas sometimes. And we're living in a time, I think, where people just want to have an argument, and everyone's riled up right now. Have you guys had any personal kind of backlash online or in real life from the kind of, you're producing meat, those animals, you don't care about them because you're killing them in the end? Has anything like that happened?
I have to say we've probably been quite fortunate in that we haven't had anything really bad. I think what actually we do get occasionally on social media are people who, I really believe that people can see that we really care about what we do, that we're really passionate about what we do, that we're very, very, very personally invested in ensuring that the welfare of our animals are as good as we possibly can make it. And I think people get that. I think that in some ways makes it even harder when we'll have people that support what we do. We'll have people who think what you're doing for the climate is great, what you're doing for the soil health and the environment is great, but they have made a choice to along kind of similar ethics and along similar beliefs to then choose to have a vegan diet, and they'll have made that decision because they can't imagine an animal dying for their kind of food. And I think that's where sometimes we'll just get people almost kind of going, I don't understand, we're on the same page until this fundamental point. How can you do this? So whereas we're not at the opposite end of the system, whereby we're in an intensive pig unit, and you've got people marching outside and liberating all your pigs. People can see our pigs romping around out in the forest or whatever. I think we kind of blur a lot of people's minds, and I think we blur the black and white, and I like that. We make a lot of gray.
Yeah, I love exploring the gray areas as well. I'm gonna put a little plug in here for my podcast. If you haven't looked at it, there's lots of gray areas explored on there. Sean's Wildlife Podcast. Jeff has been on, and
Okay.
Jeff, you've talked to me before about some of the let's say vegan or plant-based backlash that you've got on social media. Can you tell us a little bit about that and how you often turn them around?
Yeah. So I want to show the whole story. So I show that my pigs from piglet to them being on my plate, and I often get people that start to follow me for the cute piglet photos, and then at some point there's going to be photos of a carcass hanging. But that's the whole reason why the piglets were there, is because that was going to be their destiny, and that can be quite confronting for people who only see these cute animal photos the entire time. And I regularly get negative comments about that, but I tend to go like I'll try and engage with them and try to make them see my point, and also explain like what I said about like you kill one animal, but it's not like there's no death in a vegan diet, and I try to make them understand that. Sometimes I succeed, sometimes I don't. Sometimes it's very frustrating and very because I do this from a good how do you say that, like you want to do good, but sometimes death can also be involved in it's part of the cycle, but we can choose to have to be part of the death that's part of the cycle, or the death that kills everything. That's like that's if you
this is a personal question for both of you, which I don't have on my list, but it's just come to me. Do you find it difficult, like sending animals off for slaughter at the end, when you've taken so much care in them and things?
Yeah, definitely. But I always look at it like this. I'd rather have it be difficult for me, like I have my pigs a good life and one bad day, and then I am the one who, who feels bad, than have it the other way around. When the farmer with 10,000 pigs in a barn, he doesn't have the space and time to get emotionally attached to all of these pigs, so he doesn't, I guess, doesn't feel bad for sending those pigs to slaughter. But the pigs have a tough life, so I'd rather have them have a good life and me, feeling a little bit bad because I have to say goodbye to them, because I've raised them my entire life. I've seen them being born. I know every little bit that they ate. I've seen them every day of their lives. I lived with them, worked with them. So yeah, it's definitely not an easy thing to do, ending an animal's life, and it's never easy. And I always tell myself the day that it will start to get easy is the day that I will stop, because it's a very, it's quite something, but it's important. And
yeah. What about you, Lynn? What's that day like for you and Sandra?
Yeah. I mean, I just agree with everything that Jeff says. It's not an easy day. It shouldn't be an easy day. And if it is an easy day, then we need to stop.
Yeah. Okay. I know we're running fairly low on time, so there's just one or two kind of comments and questions that have come in. Chantal raises a good point. She said, you've mentioned traditional farming and regenerative farming being a new farming method. However, are these traditional methods in fact more recent, the past 50 to 60 years, shaped by governments providing subsidies for removal of hedgerows, as an example? As such, my question is regenerative farming new, or is it actually a revival of something which goes back to before modern farming? That's a good observation, I think.
Yeah. I mean, I think it is. I mean, I think if we talk about regenerative agriculture as a new movement, rather than actually a new way of farming, it's actually, using a lot of traditional methods, but it's not using them in a way that's kind of, going back, that's like not progressing. It's actually maybe looking at what we used to do and think, a lot of people will look at what we do and go, oh, my granddad used to do that. I remember when my grandpa did that. And nowadays, it's very, very, very different. So I would say that a lot of regenerative agriculture is about, seeing what we used to do, but actually embracing, what we have in the 21st century and trying to merge the two together.
Improving upon it, like. Yeah.
I think I've got a pretty cool example of how we bring old and new together. In the Netherlands, we live with a lot of water. I mean, a good part of our country is below sea level. There's a few major rivers that run through the country, and they used to flood fairly regularly, pretty much every year. And so they put big dikes right along the rivers to channel the water from mountain, in Switzerland, to the sea as quickly as possible. But with climate change, there's more water coming down, and the dikes were bursting or overflowing. And so what they did is instead of having the dikes align the rivers, they took them a little bit further out again, giving the rivers their floodplain back. But those floodplains were previously farmed. And what they did now is, so they let it rewild again, but they introduced horses and cattle, and in some places water buffalo or European bison, to graze those developing nature reserves. And in some instance, we've asked, that was at the State Forestry Department where I used to work, as we had a farmer that lost his land to the dikes moving, and he used to graze his cattle there. But we asked him, like, can you buy a herd of Highland cattle? Because we would still like to work with you, but we cannot have Holsteins grazing in like a riverine forest. But if you could graze it with Highland cattle, then we get the ecological function of grazing animals, which nature needs. They keep the vegetation down for when the water needs to flow, and you can sell the meat. And that cooperation is something really, really cool, I think. It's you restore an old ecosystem type, but there's still food being produced, and there's various examples of that in the Netherlands. There are several organizations that specifically have where they use conic horses and different kinds of primitive cattle breeds, and they'll hire them out to organizations that manages nature reserves. But of course the herds will grow, and you can't keep all the animals, so you take a certain amount of animals out. Those are sent to the slaughterhouse, and they are sold as wilderness meat, because those animals have lived year round outside and provided nature with the ecological needs, the ecological function that it needs. Yeah. And the animals had a great life, and yeah, people are very willing to pay for that. So.
Yeah, good stuff. Yeah. So if anyone does have any more questions, we're going to wrap up before 9, but if you have any questions, just pop them in the chat box. I know a couple of people came in late and may have some questions, so we'll ask those in a second. But just to kind of wrap up the conversation, you've talked to us about your kind of business models, guys. What would you say, can anyone that's currently farming and at any scale apply some of these principles to what they're doing, or do you have to go all or nothing? Or, you know, what's your advice for people currently farming that might be a bit interested in regenerative agriculture? Lynn, we'll go to you first, maybe.
So do you mean, is that a question for people that are farming currently, or
let's say farming currently, and we'll talk about people entering farming later?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very, very difficult one, because most farming, as I was kind of talking about earlier, is really driven by the subsidy system as it currently stands. So I think it's going to be very interesting to see how that changes over the coming years. I think that if governments are going to move towards incentivizing more environmental practices, I think that will be a massive game changer. I think for people that are wanting to change before that happens and don't really know how to go about it, you know, there's so many more resources than there were 5 years ago, you know, whenever we were starting out. There's so many more people that are kind of espousing regenerative agriculture, you know, and people that are doing it on massive scales. You know, the classic one is Gabe Brown in America, who wrote Dirt to Soil, and that's an incredible book to read, because he is, you know, he's got thousands of acres. You know, he's a big arable guy. He's got lots of animals as well, and he's really talked about shifting you know, from really mainstream big ag to regenerative agriculture. So I would start to kind of look at those people, the big guys. Equally, I would look at the work of people like Richard Perkins, who do it on a much smaller scale. You know, people who have kind of taken permaculture and then, you know, made it farm scale, truly made it farm scale.
He's just written a book on regenerative agriculture, hasn't he?
Has, yeah, he has. And so you've got all the, I think, you know, like I was kind of talking about earlier, you know, one of the criticisms is it's usually the little guys that are talking about it, but actually there are lots of big guys out there doing it. You know, Gabe Brown, you know, Charles Massey down in Australia, Joel Salatin in America. There's lots of really big guys doing it. So yeah, there's lots of good places to start.
Yeah, great. What would your advice be, Jeff, for people currently in farming then, if they wanted to explore regenerative ag?
Go visit farmers that are already doing it, and talk to them. See, maybe they were also previously farmers that had to make that change. Learn from them, build a community, that like what we've been doing, connect to people. Maybe it might be difficult to leave your farm for a week or something, but go and work with them. And also what I find really like an interesting observation is that a lot of people that are new to agriculture generally take at least over here in the Netherlands, tend to take the regenerative route from the start. So that's a very encouraging thing to see. I also realized that if you already have a big existing farm, that you can't switch your whole system around from, you know, in one day. So it takes time. But if you really get convinced that this is the way forward, and we all believe that it is, then any small step is worth something. So do what you
yeah, that's what I was going to say next. I was going to say maybe it's the Instagram effect, but it does seem to be that a lot of new and young people entering farming now are doing it in a way that's a lot more nature friendly, a lot more thoughtful around the environment and climate change and things like that. So
and they don't have that legacy of a family behind them that have done it for a certain way for generations, and put a lot of effort into building a farm like that, and then you come around, and you want
newfangled ideas.
So that's a bit easier for them, of course, if you're starting out like I did. Like my parents aren't farmers.
Yeah.
But
from scratch almost.
Yeah.
Okay. One more question came in from Julia a little while ago, and Lynn, you touched on it briefly about kind of production, level of production. So Julia said, hi, regenerative farming is promoted as the future way of producing food, both vegetables and food of animal origin, but the amount of land required to produce food in this way seems to be much larger. Even if the resources used per unit of food produced is very low or non-existent, even when carbon capture in soil is net positive, would you see this low level of production as a barrier to wider uptake of regenerative farming?
I don't believe it is a low level. I don't believe it is a lower level of productivity. I just don't simply believe that it is, and I think there's more and more science and more examples showing that that's not the case. It was always whenever organic came about, it was like, oh well, organic is less productive, and it's not. It's about kind of weaning ourselves off this reliance that we've built up over the years on the way that we farm now, and the inputs that we use to get those kinds of levels of crop growth and of levels of animal growth. So I don't believe that it is. I think what we have to do is ride out the change, and I think we have to ride out the change in farming in a more environmentally way, farming in a way that is more in harmony with nature, because at the end of the day, nature is the most efficient system out of all systems that have ever been created, of which we are a part of. Nature is the most efficient system. We've just distanced ourselves from it. We've separated ourselves from it, and we no longer understand it. And I think what we have to do is get ourselves back into nature and understand how natural processes work, because as clever as we think we are, and as productive as we think we are simply not as productive as we could be if we were much more in harmony with nature.
I really agree. I think there is so much potential for food producing in this on the planet. We haven't even scratched the surface. We are very inefficient how we use land worldwide, I think, and I think that many we can produce there. For instance, when you look at pigs, there are forests that don't have wild boar in them that we can rotate pigs through. That give a same ecological function. The forest is already there, and the forest is begging pretty much to be utilized. And
they're poor. They're poor in biodiversity for the lack of wild boar, right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, and the same with grazing. There is just so much land begging to be grazed, and that's the cool thing about the tools that we have. These days, movable electric fencing. You can move animals around, even in spaces like what I saw in Romania. People were grazing cows on the roadside. Imagine if we did that here. I mean, the grass grows. So and also of all the habitable space on the earth, only about 30% can be used to grow crops, and the remaining 70% can only feed us via animals, and mainly grazing animals. For instance, if you go to Mongolia, you can't grow many crops there. I mean, that land can only feed people via grazing animals, and that's also what people don't often think about, I think.
Yeah, we have another question come in, which we'll touch on that in a second. But one thing I think we didn't bring in too much, Lynn, you mentioned it, is food waste. So another big inefficiency, not only of how we manage our land and produce our food, but the amount of waste. I've seen the statistic thrown around that up to 40% of food produced in the UK actually goes to waste. So you can't in one respect, you can't say, oh, you have to make the right choices, or cheap food, or we're farming in an inefficient way, when actually we're throwing away a lot of what we produce. A huge issue, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that sort of challenges the rhetoric of we have to produce more and we have to feed the world and we have to continually increase productivity, and we have to balance that against how much food are we wasting, you know, how much is that costing all of us, how much is that costing the system. And at some point there we've kind of square the balance sheet up. So yeah, it's not just producing more, it's about wasting less, and you know what's happening in between.
Yeah, it's one of the criticisms of rewilding versus agriculture. It's like the two can go hand in hand. You know, losing productive food production land to rewilding doesn't have to be such a negative thing. There can be overlapping, can't there? Yeah.
Absolutely. And you know, the antithesis of really making rewilding work is having, you know, animals incorporated as part of it, you know, having, you know, large herbivores, you know, having the wild boar, you know, they're all really important ecological functions, and you can't have, you know, truly rewilded landscapes without all of them, including us.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay,
go on, Jeff.
Oh yeah, sorry. What I mentioned before is that the Netherlands is such an intensified agricultural country, because we are the second biggest agricultural exporter, but also the headquarters of Rewilding Europe are also based in the Netherlands. So we have because we don't have a lot of space, we have to utilize our space very efficiently, and I think the Dutch have learned to utilize and they're starting to do it more and more, and work with nature, and produce food, as opposed to what we said earlier, farming and nature. It's coming together more here, and that's a very nice thing to see.
Yeah, for sure. One last question then before we go, and it comes from Chantal again. She said, me again, to the point made by Jeff earlier, re veganism. I get the point about industrial farming being an issue, monocultures, pesticides, etc. But surely it goes back to regenerative farming being the solution. If plants were grown in this progressive way, that could address the issue many vegans have, rather than comparing industrial farming of plant crops to regenerative animal farming. Not having a go, genuine question, as I too have an issue with vegan food being processed, mass-produced, etc.
I don't really understand the question.
So I think she's asking, can we just apply regenerative principles to plant agriculture and then rest easy that we're making a better choice rather than regenerative animal farming? But the two go hand in hand, don't they?
Yes, that's the thing. It's not, I think where we went wrong in the food production system is that centuries before, we always had animals and plants working together on one farm, because you needed the manure of the animals to fertilize your plants. And at some point, I think it started after the Second World War, is that they became livestock farmers, and they became arable farmers, and that's where. But it's really it needs to go hand in hand. You can't separate the two. If you look at nature, animals and plants are continuously working together. So yes, you can grow plants regeneratively, but you will still need involvement of animals in that system. If you only eat plants, those plants need to be fertilized as well, and that will be, should come from animal manure or what fish meal, whatever.
It's going back to that ultimate principle that regenerative agriculture is a solution in many ways, because it's mimicking nature. It's going back to those natural systems where everything is interconnected, and if we make the right choices in how we produce our food and things, hopefully climate and biodiversity loss and things can be helped along the way.
Yes.
Yeah. Chantal said, thank you, Jeff. This makes what you said earlier much clearer to me now.
Yeah.
So nailed that one. Catherine said, this has been really interesting. Unfortunately, we have to go, but thanks so much. And Tash said, I have to go. Thank you for an absolutely fascinating and insightful webinar. Keep up the amazing work, please, Lynn and Jeff.
We will.
So any closing thoughts, guys, before we head off, or where can we find out more about what you're doing? Lynn first.
Well, we have website. Obviously, we have Instagram. We're on Facebook. We have a book coming out next year. So we've just finished a book with Chelsea Green Publishing. So that's going to be coming out in spring next year. Yeah, you can just sort of follow us online.
Great. So it's Lynbreck Croft, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. And what about you, Jeff? Any closing thoughts, or where can people find out more about you?
Yeah, this has been really nice. Thanks for having us. People can find me mainly on Instagram at Mangalitsa Farmer NL for Netherlands, and Mangalitsa is the breed of pig that I raise. It's Mangalitsa with TZ. Yeah, you can reach out to me there. I'm very active there. You can see everything that I do on the farm, and there's also a bit of a personal twist of my life, and yeah, feel free to say hi. And
Brilliant.
Also on your podcast.
yes, Sean's Wildlife Podcast. I think we called the episode "We Need to Talk About Meat," didn't we?
Yeah.
Good stuff. Well, guys, thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy evening and busy lives to have a chat. It's been great chatting. Hopefully we can do it again in person in future.
Yeah, visit.
Definitely. Yeah,
I'm dying to come visit, Jeff, when these restrictions have been, keeping me from visiting lots of interesting people. So I'll be over soon, I'm sure. And for everyone watching, thank you so much for joining us. Do spread the word. This recording of this webinar will be available on YouTube in the next couple of days. So it'd be great if you can share it and share the word on regenerative agriculture. And if you haven't already, please do subscribe to our AgriWild mailing list on our website as well. Myself and Heidi have got some very exciting news and developments coming soon. So over and out from us. Thanks again, Lynn. Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks
everyone
very much
for watching.
Cheers. Thank you.
Bye now.
Bye. Thank you.